I wonder what they're thinking about. I wonder what they're thinking about me. I wonder who will visit next. These are just 3 of at least 75 questions that went through my head the first hour I spent in prison. No, I had not just been incarcerated, and I wasn't visiting a friend, and I wasn't even doing a research project. In fact, I was there for something I think we can all relate to: TED. Let me explain. While I was an undergrad, I started the first TEDx event to take place on my campus, TEDx Ohio State University. And it was during that time when I was asked to collaborate with Marion Correctional Institution, a prison an hour north of Columbus, Ohio, in an attempt to start the first TEDx event in the world to take place in prison. Picture this. It's my first day there. I'm in prison. There's 4 of us. It's myself, Jody Davis, the director of the nonprofit who'd be leading the program, and a soon-to-be mentor and lifelong friend, and 2 men dressed in their prison state blue uniforms, Dan and Wayne, one in for 34 years, the other for life. And the 4 of us sat, looked around at each other, and then we started talking. Our ages ranged from 19, myself, to 70, and we looked like your average TEDx team in prison. And yet, the ideas and talking from minutes went to hours, and we were excited. We were excited about the idea that we could use TEDx as a platform to spread conversations on social justice and privilege and life and all the complex ideas in between. It looked a lot like this, although there were a couple more security guards, and half the people in the room were dressed in their prison state blue uniforms. The other half were coming from the outside. We had students, professors. My favorite is a criminal justice professor who had never stepped foot in a prison. And then the inside, the speakers were also, half of them incarcerated, the other half were speaking on the justice system. We had a warden, a previous incarcerated person. And we let the ideas flow. Much like today, we bonded through conversation. We let people who might not have interacted with each other before stand next to someone, look them in the eye, recognize their humanity, and talk. There were incredible performances and speakers throughout that day, but one of which was Dan, one of the first men that I talked to you about, and one of the first men that I met in prison. In addition to being a dear mentor of mine, he also is a poetic genius and incredibly talented with spoken word poetry. And on that first event, he stood before the crowd and he recited a poem that he had written about a simple hug. He talked about the first time he reconnected with his daughter in the visiting room of the prison after years of being disconnected. And he talked about that hug being anything but simple, representing his past self and his current self and his daughter's past self and current self coming together and talking, recognizing each other. It was powerful. It was beautiful. There were some tears. And then we moved on to incredible other speakers throughout the day. And then a couple weeks later, when his talk was posted on YouTube, his daughter got a hold of it, and she posted a response. In true father-daughter fashion, she posted her own spoken word poetry titled A Simple Hug. And Brooke talked about her own experience being reconnected with her father and the complexity of that, and rekindling their relationship. And since, I'm proud to say, they have shared a hug from our TEDx Marion Correctional audience. Dan is one of many stories of the powerful conversations and moments that come from a TEDx event, but also leaning into the discomfort sometimes of being in a place that you're not familiar with. In this situation, prison. When we have hundreds of people coming in and out of those events, we've since put on almost 10. They're doing their 10th in November. But TEDx isn't the only place where those conversations are happening. And we knew we needed to find another way to replicate those conversations and an opportunity for people to see people who were different than themselves as human beings, as fellow complex people going through this complicated thing called life. And so we did. We reached out to universities around the country, and we started a new series. You see, there was one computer that had access to the internet, and under supervision, we were able to Skype with different universities and groups around the country and started a Skype series in an effort to build empathy. Empathy meaning the ability to try and share the feelings and understandings of another. And so we went to Duke University and Harvard Law School, a young professional group in Ohio. And we sat and we connected two audiences, the students, young professionals, whoever we could get in a room. And then we would Skype in with a group of 5 to 8 currently incarcerated people, and they would share their stories on the justice system. We would get some questions out of the way, like, is it like Orange is the New Black? And then we would move on towards, what does a day in prison look like? How do you get past the fact that you've spent possibly over half your life incarcerated? How do you maintain the relationships you want to maintain? How do you become the person you want to be? The same questions I like to ask myself. And in these conversations, we again saw this amazing opportunity of breaking down stereotypes and instead building up empathy and trying to learn and better understand the person beside you or the person on the other screen. In one of our audiences, when we first launched at Cornell University, there was a judge that sat. He listened to our facilitated question-answer conversation. We talked about the mass incarceration epidemic in the US. We gave out some of the numbers, and more importantly, though, we tried to put a face to the statistics. The judge stood up when there was a time for people to ask their questions, and he asked, "Do you believe the justice system is just?" It's a pretty big question. Not so many answers, or maybe a lot of answers, but not sure how clear they are. And yet with courage, one of the men on the other line stood up and slowly started to begin to explain how, although he had not expected to spend decades in prison, although he had not expected his life to look the way it had, he had learned certain things throughout the process. He had built certain relationships throughout the process. He had learned about himself and the world around him. And although unexpected, there are things that we can all learn. Unfortunately, there was no conclusion on if the justice system is just right now, but I think we all know we have some room for improvement. But it reminded me that over those 3 years, the complicated conversations are what made it worth it. Working in a prison during that time gave me the opportunity, the incredibly unique opportunity, to have conversations like talking about honesty with someone who is incarcerated for theft and robbery, talking about feminism with someone convicted of rape, talking about love and hatred with someone doing life for murder. None of these are simple conversations, yet all of these challenges that we can give each other to just try and better understand the human being sitting beside us is what can make this world more connected. Where else can we replicate these conversations? Is it the way that we can stand at the end of our driveway a little longer and talk to our neighbor, ask a question beyond, "Hi, how are you? I'm fine, thanks," and being robotic? Is it the way that we can talk with our sons and daughters differently, or our parents? Maybe with the intention of asking questions to better understand, not just reprimand? Is the way that we look at our coworkers, maybe knowing that they're not just the one version of themselves they brought into work that day? We are all complicated human beings. It's the least that we can do is recognize that and try to understand that about each other. I learned many things over those years working in prison and with men who I am forever grateful for the way they taught me how to live life with more gratitude and more respect for the people around me. And among those lessons and many conversations, I was also exposed to spoken word poetry and the incredible talent that unfortunately is cast aside and remains within those walls. But today, I wanted to write a poem and dedicate it to them, to all those men who have transformed my life and helped me better understand who I am and the many different stories that are around us. It was a few visits in when I learned of the swastika on his chest. The worried tone of my Jewish grandparents echoed in my head. "Hide your Star of David. Don't let anyone know you're Jewish." I felt a rational tug to do just that. But then I remembered the raw conversations that this brief and new and unusual friendship had been founded upon. I remembered how I sat in amazement the first time I heard his spoken word poetry, and months later, the horror I felt as he recalled the initiation where he curb stomped the kid after his bar mitzvah. But ultimately, I remember the slow courage I felt as I rebelled against the rational tug of my Jewish grandparents and told him, I am a Jew. Flooded with the surprising feeling of freedom, I finally looked up. Forced to recognize someone who no longer sat in a singular box, we are all more than one thing. You see, tattoos were among the first of things that both confirmed and shattered stereotypes over those years of observation, just like any good conversation should. In fact, the simply stated hatred tattooed on the side of his neck became a bold symbol of irony as our team only grew with gratitude through each of our added differences. From hatred and swastikas, teardrops and tributes, each tattoo told many stories. One story revealed the frozen moment in time when they were permanently pressed onto their skin, and the second emphasized the journey and sometimes entirely different person who stood before me, recalling the person they were when they first got that tattoo. I am not the same person I was a year ago, let alone 5 or 20. Are you? Are they? When did we start forgetting we are each such multi-dimensional human beings? We are not just our resumes or our records. Thank you.